Hello.
Hi,
Oh,
thank you for joining us. You're having some computer problems?
where's my volume?
Awesome.
No? Oh, okay, cool. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Not bad. I was actually just almost got stuck in traffic and it's
Oh
raining
no.
heavily here. So it was like, oh, am I gonna make it? Am I gonna make it? Am I gonna make it? Then I started thinking, hold on a second. Are you in Adelaide or are you in Melbourne?
We're in Adelaide.
In Adelaide. Why did I think Melbourne?
I don't know.
Did you guys
No,
or did
we've
you
been here the whole time.
Why do I seem to remember you guys taking a trip to Melbourne or something like that? Or on the beach, somewhere on the beach.
Yeah, we live on the beach here, but we did go to Melbourne like a month after we moved here, so 3 years ago. But
So I was
at
like,
some point in time, we did go there.
so I was thinking to myself, like, hold on a second. I remember somebody telling me that you guys are in Melbourne. So I was asking Siri what the time differences were. And I was like, there is an hour difference between Adelaide and Melbourne.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. That put a lot in perspective. So I was like, 30 minutes could be tricky. But anyway, yes. Thank you so much for your time. How are you?
No worries. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. No problem. Yeah, so I actually wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. One of which was starting with like your move to Australia.
Mhm.
Like what precipitated the move? Like, why did you guys move from Korea to Australia?
Okay, so when we were in South Korea, I was doing my master's degree online there.
Right.
So I did my master's in applied behavior analysis. And all that is just the study of human behavior and analyzing human behavior. And so the next step that would come after the master's degree is to do clinical supervision hours, same like a psychologist would, or a speech pathologist or doctor, everybody that has to go through their clinical practice. So I needed to do 1,500 hours of clinical supervision in order to sit for my licensing exam. But I couldn't do that in Korea because I wasn't fluent in Korean, and to teach children how to speak, I would need to be fluent in their language, aside from just teaching them how to speak English. But teaching children that are non-vocal or have learning disabilities how to adapt to their world would obviously be really hard without being fluent in their language. And so we said, I needed to go to an English speaking country in order to fulfill my clinical hours. And we're like, oh, we haven't been to Australia yet, so let's go there. And that's why we chose Australia. And then to come to Adelaide specifically is I was looking up, in order to do my clinical supervision hours, you have to be supervised by somebody who's licensed. And there's not many licensed behavior analysts in Australia, or there weren't 3 years ago. So I was looking around at the different people that are available to do supervision. And there were people in Brisbane, there were people in Melbourne, there were people in Sydney, I think a few in Perth in Western Australia. And then there was one woman in Adelaide in South Australia. And I was like, oh, I haven't heard of Adelaide. I've heard of these other cities. So I was just Googling all of them and looked up Adelaide, and it was described online as like a small country town. And it was on just the whole coastline full of beaches. And then we have the hills just behind us, and that's all vineyards full of wineries. There's like 2 massive wine regions surrounding us. The whole city is like full of green space. There's a huge emphasis on sports here and being outdoors. And so having like a smaller town rather than a big city, and having all that green space and the wineries and the beaches, we were like, oh, it's perfect for what we're looking for. So I searched for her and emailed her, and she agreed to supervise me. And that's why we're here.
Wow. So First of all, Australia kind of, as you were describing it, kind of reminds me of my first trip to California, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wine, vineyards, mountains. Yeah. So was
And
it
it,
was it easy for her? Was it a straightforward process of just talking to her and then asking her to supervise you, and then that's it?
yeah, so I started speaking to her about 2 years before we even moved here.
Ah,
So it was a long process in terms of I told her that I was interested just to kind of see if that would be an option for us at all. And then as I was finishing up my master's degree in Korea, I finished in 2017 and we ended up leaving in 2018, a few months after. Um, but throughout that time, I was meeting with her and they had the intention of bringing me in as a supervisor straight away.
hmm,
But then I just didn't have the practical experience. I had all the theoretical knowledge and like I understood the theory of our science really well, but I didn't have any of the hands-on experience in the last few years because I had done it prior to Korea, prior to Zambia, back in the early 2010 to 2012. I was working in this field, but obviously I had been out of practice. So um, she ended up deciding that I couldn't come on as a supervisor. I needed to come on as a therapist and work my way up into the supervisor role. But it was, yeah, straightforward. She said she was more than happy to have me. She has a lot of external people living here. So I call us the company like United Nations. We have a lot of immigrants working at our company, which is great because there's a big immigrant population here. So we're also working with a lot of immigrant families and children. But we came in on a working holiday visa,
yeah.
which was valid for 1 year. And that was sort of my probationary period for the company. And then after that, at the end of that 1 year, they liked me enough to offer to sponsor me. So then they sponsored and they took Steve on as well, my partner, for my sponsorship. And yeah, so they've kept us here for the last, now it's almost, we've just had our 3 year anniversary here.
3 years, yeah. Jesus, I still can't believe it's been that long since you guys left, but it's
Oh.
cool. So what does your work entail now? What kind of things do you do?
So now I am in the program supervisor role.
Yeah.
So I have less of a hands-on approach with most of my clients. On my caseload, I have about 15 clients, 14 clients that I'm responsible for. And with all of those clients, I have therapy teams. So I supervise the therapists who implement the programs that I write for my clients. So I'll see them every 2 weeks for a team meeting with the clients, either at their home or at our clinic, and I'll review all of the programs that I've put in and see how they're progressing. So primarily the population that we're working with is, excuse me, children with autism, doing early intervention. I've kind of, yeah, have a much broader role than just the autism spectrum. So I have a lot of clients that have a lot of medical complexities and comorbidities. So they have multiple diagnoses, different genetic disorders such as like Down syndrome, Fragile X, a lot of really rare genetic mutations and things like that. So I'm seeing quite a large spectrum of clients. I have some clients that are visually impaired as well as have autism or have intellectual impairments. So having to do like sign language with them. Most of my clients are non-vocal, so working with teaching them different ways to communicate. So essentially what we do is go in and run assessments and see where they're at developmentally and what sort of skills they're lacking in terms of their ability to communicate and navigate our complex social world that we live in. And then whatever those deficits are, we look at all of the little tiny steps to build those skills up and what splinter skills they might be missing if they can't speak. Is it a problem of the connection between the brain and the oral motor planning of their mouth? Is it because they're just going to be non-vocal for the rest of their life? What other forms of communication should we teach them? A lot of kids, when they are non-vocal, they then replace all of their speech with their behaviors because that's how they get their communication across. So they very quickly learn that if they can't communicate for what they want, but they can pull someone's hair and that'll give them what they want, or they can slam their head into a wall and that person will offer them everything to try and calm them down. that reinforces that behavior. So then they're like, okay, well, next time, this is what I do in
Mm.
order to get what I want. So that's why most of the kids on my caseload have quite extreme behaviors. And that's my specialization per se, is the kids with more challenging behaviors, because they have more complex issues going on, and they have a history of learning to communicate in inappropriate ways.
Oh, that must be that must be quite challenging, especially with the idea of going to people's homes as well. How do people usually respond to having like this kind of care in their home? Are they open to it?
Yeah, I mean, we need buy-in from the beginning for them to engage in our services. I don't think we've had any families that have said, it's very, very rare to have a family that'll say, nope, you can't come to the house, we'll come to the clinic and see you. But because we look at a multifaceted approach of like, or more of a holistic approach of the client, we look at what are they eating? How are they sleeping? What is their like toileting look like? Are they able to bathe? Do they have any self-care skills? Can they wash their hands, brush their teeth, dress themselves? And we look at speech, and we look at like just all of these other prerequisite skills that a child needs to be able to learn. Just to be able to learn, they have to have so many different skills. Like a lot of kids with autism don't have eye contact. So if they're not looking at you, how do you know that they're paying attention when you're trying to teach them something? That we need to teach them a different way to attend to a speaker without having to look in their eyes, but being able to sit still and follow different objects as we're trying to use those objects to teach. So like even just teaching those skills of tracking an object around as it moves is a prerequisite. So yeah, families, because we look at everything and we ask all of those questions, we typically get a lot of buy-in from the parents, because they're seeking help. They don't know what to do with their kids. They don't know how to raise them because of the different ways that they learn. So they're very open to us coming in and looking at their entire environment and seeing what sort of environmental manipulations we can make that set that child up for success.
My God, that's that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot to kind
We're
of do.
everywhere in their lives. We're in their bathrooms. We're in their bedrooms. We're like, we're very much involved, and it is, yeah, it's a lot.
What are some of the challenges that you feel that you faced doing the job so far?
It's probably horrible to say if you're going to put this online, but I always say that.
I mean, just as part of your own experience. You don't have to be extremely graphic on it, but
No, I think parents are the hardest part of my job.
yeah.
Like, yeah, I work with a lot of really challenging kids. I end up in some really challenging situations, working through some really extreme behaviors. I've gotten hurt a lot in the process because the kids lash out because that's what they know. And I'm that safe person, and I'm willing to put myself through that in order to see them to the other side. So aside from like all of the physical injuries and aggression that I take on, I don't really think like that would be a tough day at work for me. But the hardest part is, yeah, sometimes dealing with parents, because even though they do want our services, it's sometimes with different cultures, it's kind of just like they want nothing to do with it. So it's like they're seeing us as, you come in, you fix my child, you give them back to me when you're done. And it doesn't work like that, because we're only there for a few hours a day. The parents are there 24 hours a day. And my whole goal is to always be upskilling the parents so that I can work myself out of a job. I'm always trying to fade myself out by upskilling them to be able to do it all and
Right.
to know what to do, know how to handle their children. So that is really hard to get parents involved sometimes. Like, they're happy for us to come into their homes, but they really struggle with following the protocols. And yeah, just, it's hard being in between two parents that have different perspectives about how things should be done. And you're trying to give your professional recommendation, but one parent completely disagrees and one parent's on board, but you need both parents to be on board. That's just really tough. And then the insurance scheme here is really tough as well. Like, since I've become a supervisor, I've had to do a lot more of the administrative side rather than the practical side, the practitioner side, where I'm good at being a clinician, but I'm not good at sitting and writing reports and having to file insurance claims with the National Disability Insurance Scheme here and argue for funding and going into those meetings and saying, oh, this is your legislation and this is why you're not following your legislation by giving these clients the right to service. And yeah, that's not at all my strong suit. So I really struggle with that.
Man, I was thinking when you were talking about culture, and I started thinking, especially if someone, in my own experience, growing up in Central Africa, I never heard of like psychological like struggles and anything like these are the sort of things that people don't talk about. You know? So I think it's only when we moved to London that's when I was like, I became more open to the idea that, you know, children, even in my school, some children weren't behaving well and there was a reason to it. It's just something that we never, ever talked about. I wasn't aware. First of all, I was too young. And second, it just wasn't a thing that was culturally talked about.
Oh, exactly. And it's the same way in Korea. And that was my experience in Zambia as well. Yeah, when I was teaching in Korea, I had a lot of students as I was doing my master's where I was like, this kid has autism, but I can't diagnose them. And if I were to make suggestions like that to the principal or to the parent, I would have lost my job because that's not my role. I'm there to teach them English. But to notice that so many kids do need help, but because of the culture, it's taboo for them to seek out that help because of what shaming they might endure as a family, or alienation in their community because it is so communal. That's what prevents so many people from seeking out those services. And yeah, I hope that as mental health gets more and more openly talked about around the world and more of these services become available, that, you know, children that do need access to that and need that extra support are able to get it, because there are so many kids that, yeah, just need a little bit of extra TLC.
Yeah, I'm actually loving the fact that I don't know if you've been following anything on the news lately, but professional athletes who are pulling away from competitions and they're saying, you know, I'm not feeling mentally prepared or mentally ready to deal with all the other things that comes with the sport and stuff. And actually it's bringing mental health as a conversation. And I'm actually enjoying learning so much more about mental health. I mean, as a teacher myself, I have to pay attention to so many of these things, even though I'm not a clinician, but just knowing that it's now becoming a conversation, it's kind of exciting now, you know.
Exactly.
We're not just putting things under the rug and hiding things just because they're unpleasant to us and stuff. So I'm really liking that. Do you have any specific project that you want to do in Australia in the next years?
Yeah, so I came here to learn as much as I could from my boss, who agreed to originally sponsor me. As I said, she was one of the first board certified behavior analysts in South Australia. And she started our company out of her living room. And it actually, on Monday this week, we were acquired by a much larger company that's now national across Australia. So we have about 500 employees now at our new company. But the business that she started, I think it was about 8 years ago, she was running it all out of her living room, and she grew it from just having, I think, 6 clients in the beginning and a few therapists to, when we were sold the other day, we had about 50 therapists or 50 staff, and we've reached over 500 children here. And now we're on a much bigger scale. Yeah, it was really cool. And so one of my main things coming here and getting supervision from her is one day I really want to open up my own practice, though I have a spin on it, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later, of exactly what I want to do. And I think that she's a really good resource. So I'd love to learn more from her now that she's stepped back from that managerial position and will have more time on her hands, just to delve into the business aspect and how do you get going and how do you develop all these programs from scratch and how do you bring people on? How do you get the therapists? How do you get families and clients and buy-in and funding and what sort of investments and all of that. I think that she'd be a great resource to learn a lot of that from. And then in terms of my own project, I'm keen to stay on this company that I've just started at for a little bit longer and really see what sort of different avenues that I can take through them with their support, because it is a much larger organization. There's a lot more money for professional development. And I think that I can really learn a lot through all of the different courses that they offer and streams of services that they offer. So I'd like to still maybe stay on for about a year as a clinician there. And then I'd love to go off on my own for a bit and just see what it's like starting off, where in a place where I'm comfortable. I know I would have clients. I know that like people might either come with me, or I would definitely get clients out there because of the name that I've made for myself and what my experience and qualifications are. So I think it could be a good place to trial starting private services and looking at what I want to do as a clinician and how I would want to build up my own practice. Yeah, that would be an ideal project. I've always dreamed about traveling around Australia. We came here to travel around Australia. We got in right before the lockdown, and we've been stuck in South Australia for the last 2 years. So we haven't really seen any other part of Australia aside from a short trip to Melbourne along the coastline and the 12 Apostles and that stuff. But yeah, we've really explored our state a bit, and I'd love to see the rest of the country, but I think it would be really cool to have a mobile clinic and really go out into the more rural areas as respectfully as possible and not force services on people, but just kind of put it out there. Here's what behavior support looks like. Willing to train up caregivers, parents, teachers, school staff, anything like that. I'd love to learn more about the Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal language and what that might look like going into the outback or into Aboriginal communities and helping to upskill people from a positive behavior perspective of getting away from punishment and looking more at reinforcement-based strategies. But yeah, I'm not sure when that would happen, or it's all just playing it by ear and taking all these other small steps in the meantime to gain as much knowledge as I can.
I think you're in the right place. Literally, the moment you said that your boss started the company from like her own living room, I started getting goosebumps. Only because I'm just like these are the most exciting stories of how like, if you can have her as someone that could mentor you, then you're definitely on the right track, because
Yeah,
she will guide you to exactly in the direction that you want to go, which sounds really good. So the long-term plan is to do the project where you provide mobile care, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's nice.
I was thinking like if I could get grants from a school, because I work in so many schools and the teachers are just like, oh, I don't have any training in this type of support. Can you come in and deliver a 2-hour seminar once a week or twice a month or whatever it is that they want for 10 weeks? I've had a school offer me every week for 10 weeks, 1 to 2 hours a week, training up their teachers. And that's so much of my time that I don't currently have at my business, because I see so many clients on a daily or on a weekly basis that to make those gaps available. And it's also quite costly for what my hourly rate is by the company. So I would want to do something like that, like find a school that is able to access educational funding for upskilling their teachers, even if it's in a rural area. And if they want 10 weeks, then I can drive my little mobile clinic out there, park up in a camper, whatever it's called, campsite that has all the utilities, showers and toilets and stuff, caravan park, and just live there cheaply while delivering these services. And if that's like a 10-week contract, I wouldn't have to work that much, which would be great. Also, I could spend all that time just developing more lessons and yeah, just upskilling. So that would be the dream, and getting to see all of these different communities and provide services in areas where they have access to nothing.
And hopefully that will also get you to travel around the country too. So
Exactly.
you'll be tapping into the two things that you want. You want to provide care, but you also want to travel and see the place. And the two could be definitely done using, this project. That's really cool. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was, so I remember you mentioning that you wanted to do something similar in Africa too. In Malawi?
In Malawi, yeah.
Malawi. But this wouldn't be your first time in Africa. You've been to Africa before. You've done, what was it? Peace Corps.
Peace Corps, yeah.
Peace Corps. How did you even come to think about doing the Peace Corps? How did that come about?
Oh, well, Peace Corps came about when it's one time I was studying in Ireland, just all over the world. And I had a flatmate there, and he was from the US, and he was really interested in Peace Corps. And that was the first time that I had ever heard about it. So he was talking to me about it all the time, and it sounded exactly like something I would want to do. I went back to the US and finished uni, and then started looking at my options. And I applied for a lot of different types of volunteer projects throughout Mexico, Brazil, South America, Eastern Europe. I was just looking at all of these jobs or volunteer jobs and applying for them, but every single one of them, you have to fundraise quite a lot of money and pay your way and pay for your board and pay for everything. And so you're not only are you making no money, but you're expending a lot of money as well. And as a freshly graduated uni student, I didn't really have any money to be doing that sort of job. So then I remembered that this guy back from Ireland Times had mentioned Peace Corps. And so I looked that up. And at the time, then I had about 3 or 4 friends that were, excuse me, already serving in the Peace Corps in different places around the world. And so I looked that up, and it was the first organization that they give you a living stipend. You don't have to pay for your flights over there. You don't have to pay for your medical care. Yeah, you get your monthly stipend. It's only about $200 a month, or they make it equivalent to what the local population would live on. It is like, obviously where I was living, $200 a month is much higher than what they're living on. But yeah, not much money there. And then it's just a 27-month contract that you sign with them. So I applied for that, and I went in for my interview, and I remember I really wanted to go to Cambodia or Thailand. That had always been my dream. And I really wanted to work in special education in one of those locations. So I went into the interview, and they have a huge world map up on the wall, and they go to take your interview photo, and they said, okay, stand in front of the map. And so I went and stood over in front of in front of Southeast Asia, just to kind of hint at that's where I wanted them to send me. But when they ask, they're like, well, how would you do in hot weather? How would you do in cold weather? How would you do living in a country if you're not allowed to go out on your own as a female, or if you have to wear a hijab and cover your head for 2 years, how would you cope with that? So they ask all of these different things, and if you have any preferences. And I just said, send me wherever you need me. And I think a few weeks later, they called me and they said, we've got an HIV/AIDS project in Africa. Are you ready to leave in like a week? And I said, yep, let's go. So I never even expected. I think they originally told me that I would be going Southeast Asia. And then I got an invite for Eastern Europe, actually. And then they called me right after they had sent me the invite for Eastern Europe, and said, we've got a job, or we've got a project in Africa. It's leaving in a week. Are you ready to go to that? So I ended up in Zambia, which was not at all, like, I never thought that, like, that was just never on my radar. I was open to going anywhere, but I didn't think that's where Peace Corps would send me. But yeah, hopped on a plane and spent 2.5 years living in Zambia, in Eastern Zambia, which is shares a border with Malawi. And the catchment area that I lived in, it was right on the border of Malawi. I could essentially ride my bike into Malawi at any time. And so ended up frequenting the beautiful Lake Malawi quite often, and all of those fishing villages. And it's beautiful there. It's paradise to me. So that's where I want to go back to.
I'd never heard of Peace Corps until I spoke to you and Steve.
Oh, really?
It's very odd because I know that a lot. I don't know, because you said your contract was a 27 months contract.
Yeah, it's 27 months.
27 months. I think one of the reasons why I never heard of that is because in Europe, usually, first of all, the people who end up doing this kind of work, it's usually after they've graduated. It's very short. I even had a friend who only went, I think, to Uganda for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And then most of it is self-funded. So you have to pay for pretty much everything. So it always makes me wonder, like, how much impact is one able to do in a space of 3 weeks if you're going into people's homes or people's lives or a very far away country? What kind of impact do you feel you had in Zambia for that 27 months?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I think that there's a lot of different ways to measure that impact. And it just depends on like what somebody views as what's important to them, I guess. Because yeah, I've been on those shorter stint projects where it's more of a voluntourism aspect, where you're going there, but you're getting more out of it than the people are, and you could potentially be hurting the people in the process. Especially like I've done one of those stints in Romania back in 2010 with my university, and we were there for 3 weeks working in an orphanage, and became so attached to these kids. And then you're leaving, and they're like, "Come back," and I'm like, "Yeah, of course, I'm coming back as soon as I can. I'll be back." I've never been back, and so like to know that so many people around the world are putting vulnerable people through those situations, I really struggle with that. And I do struggle. Like back in the day, I would say the Peace Corps was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the best time of my life. And a lot of good did come out of it, but I really struggle with that mentality of like white saviorism and new age colonialism, and if it's just like the American ideal to get into all of these places and still colonize these areas versus are we actually teaching them something better, or are they fine doing what they're doing because that's what works best for them? But what I really did like about the Peace Corps is that you are there on the grassroots level. You spend your first 3 months in the village per se, or whatever your catchment area is, living with the people, speaking. Well, your first 3 months are in training. So you're learning the language 6 days a week. We had language for 4 hours a day. We were living with a family in their home. We were going to all of these culture classes, all of these job training classes, everything that would allow us to survive there once we're on our own. And then the 3 months after that, when you first get dropped off in your new home, they tell you you're not allowed to do any work at all. So you're just spending those 3 months getting to know everybody, going around, meeting with people in the community, and really trying to figure out what their needs are and what they want. So I was there as a health volunteer, and I spent a lot of time at the local clinic that I was stationed at, which was about 3 kilometers from where I lived. I would bike out there most days of the week, and I'd help in the maternity ward. I'd help them measuring pregnant mothers, weighing babies, all the antenatal and prenatal clinics. And then I started going out into all of the different communities that I was responsible for, which was about 90 square kilometers and about 14,000 people within that community. And I would sit down with the community leaders and go through a sort of matrix of like, what are the health issues that you guys find are affecting your community the most? Is it malaria? Is it HIV? Is it maternal death rates? Is it child malnutrition? Is it hygiene, water, and sanitation, not having access to that? So we would go through like ranking all of what they thought their needs were, and then looking at all of the resources and different things that they have. So we would go out and look at their local boreholes, look at like where their nearest clinic is, go through all of the charts and all of the data of how many child deaths there were, how many deaths due to malaria, how much, what the rate of HIV was in that community. and assess all of that. And what I think I did particularly well at was getting the whole community buy-in, rather than just coming in and saying, I'm going to build a school,
Right.
when might not be what they want, what they need, or what they even have the teachers to staff. It would just sit there as an empty building. But instead, I met with each community and had them tell me what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of put all of the pieces together with them, taught them how to write grants, helped them write a grant, but they wrote the grant after I trained them how to do it. Met with the people in the government, got them to come out and meet with the community members. The community members would present their project proposal to the government, and then the government would fund it. So I was just more of the middleman of connecting all of these pieces from the resources that I knew were available that they might not know about, versus, like I said, a lot of NGOs will come in and be like, you get a t-shirt, you get a t-shirt, you get a t-shirt, here's your school. And then, so many people go and dig wells in Africa, like that's bringing water to Africa. But what they don't do is an assessment of how deep they need to dig that well, or teaching the people what to do when all the mechanisms to pull the water up break, or if the well runs dry in dry season because it's not down below a certain stream far enough in the ground. And so a lot of people aren't upskilling in the ways that are necessary for it to be sustainable after they go. I do have a few projects that I know are still running now. So I think that is a good measure of outcome. And I could look at what we had to do for the Peace Corps was report how many meetings we had, how many people attended. So how many people are we affecting each month essentially, or each quarter. But I think the best thing has been the relationships that I built with people there, and the time spent with the community members, and just having a good time with them. The fact that every child in my area hung out at my house every day because that was the place to be. And we just had so much fun together, and that every morning, everybody would come through to my little mud hut and come into my front room and sit there and wait for me to come out of bed and greet them. And it was such a joy to be there. And I do have really strong love for that community, and I'd love to go back. But again, did I cause them harm by coming for such a short time, even though almost 3 years is not a short time, but
yes, it's not a short
coming
time.
and going.
3 years is definitely not a short. I mean, compared to 3 weeks, from what some other organizations have kind of offered people, and I think 3 years, there is definitely room there for you to not only integrate, but to really understand what the people need, and then to be able to provide them with the things that they tell you that they need.
Yeah. And that was what my focus was. I really wanted that to be I wanted it to come from them, not from me.
Yeah. And I think the idea is, I don't know, I always feel for whenever I hear, I don't know, there was a story that I'm not sure if you guys told me this story, or if I'd heard it. I think I heard it in London. I'm trying to think exactly where I heard it from. So there's this wonderful university called SOA, School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And it's a school that I really wanted to go and do my master's at. And I used to go there very, very regularly to attend these conferences or talks. And one time I attended a talk where somebody was talking about a project that they started in Africa, right? They went there to help people to plant foods and all this and that. And they planted these beautiful tomatoes and all kind of things. And the people in the villages where they were just didn't really, they didn't know what was happening. They tried to stop these people from planting, but the people didn't listen. So what had happened was they never really assessed or asked the people what their issues were. And so the people knew exactly what not to do with that land for a specific reason. After all the tomatoes had grown, some hippos came and completely demolished it and destroyed everything. Some wild animals came and took over and all kind of things. So everything was destroyed. And so what the guy was telling us was the lesson was, the people that are there, they're not dumb. They're not just, they've been through that thing that you're trying to get them to go through. They might have other solutions, but perhaps the solution that you're offering them isn't the solution that they feel they need, right?
Yeah.
So I think I remember leaving that conference thinking, you can't go to a place thinking you're going to be the savior. You're going to save them from whatever they're going through. You need to go there with an open mind and listen to what they have to say, and then try to work with them to help them find solutions that are sustainable for them.
Yeah, exactly. Like
So
we all have our own way of doing things, but that doesn't mean it's the right way. And
right way,
I
yeah.
know I know that they sometimes adopted some things that I told them, but most of the time, like I hate saying it, but I probably learned more from them than what they learned from me. And I don't think that that's the point of us going over, is to gain more knowledge from them, but it's shaped who I am today,
Yeah.
because I can look at it and be humbled by that experience and learn, like, I'm not the one with all the answers. I can't just go into this place and tell people what they need. You really have to get to know somebody and figure out what works for them and what they're already doing. And if you have any way that you can tweak that to make it better, like people would go in and tell them, oh, what you're eating, it's not nutritious. Don't eat your ugali or your nshima because that's just gonna fill up your belly and there's no nutrients in that. Whereas, well, in Zambia, it's mostly just white maize, except in like the northwestern territory, it's more they use cassava and stuff, so a little bit more nutrients. Versus where I was in Eastern Province, it was all just white maize. And so I was like, well, they're all growing a bunch of soybeans, and they only grow soybeans to sell to the government. But they don't use them at all in their cooking. So what I would do was just like go and do cooking demonstrations with just a little bit of what their soya is taken from what they would sell back to the government. They're huge, massive piles, and show them like, look, you can just grind it into a powder and add this much, and the nutrients increase by that much. And so I saw that people started adopting that and cooking like more nutritious nshima or ugali. And some other things, like I would always tell my local health committees that whatever projects they wanted to do, I would support them through that and help them figure it out. But if I come to their meetings, I have to see that they've gotten their own community involved. So one of my health committees wanted to focus on hygiene, water, and sanitation in their community. And I went out there one day to join them for one of their meetings. And we had, I taught a 1-week conference with all of the different national health committee leaders from my 7 different neighborhoods. So they all came to a week for this conference that I put on, and they learned about every single type, like all of the different health issues that we were looking at. And they all kind of chose one project to work on at the end of the week. And that's when we looked at grant writing and writing project proposals and all of that. And they all sat down and wrote their project proposals in their own groups. And then later I went out to each of their communities so that I could see them present their proposal to their community. And this one that wanted to do water and sanitation, we had taught them how to build little tippy taps where you have like an old salady or like oil container filled with water with a hole poked in the lid and a string tied to it. And at the bottom of the string, there's just a twig or a branch from a tree. And you step on that and it tips the water down and it's your tap. So you can just use your foot and pedal and get some water out of this container to wash your hands after using the toilet. And I went to the meeting and they had made it a stipulation that everybody in the community coming to that meeting had to bring their own oil container that they had washed out and prepared. And then like 2 weeks later, I went and all of these houses had started building latrines, pit latrines, rather than going out just in the bush. And so they had got their whole community on board and got their buy-in by ensuring that if they wanted to attend the meeting and get the free chicken and Shima meal, that they had to bring their own supplies and then they had to go home and build them. And then I had another community write a proposal to build a health clinic because in the rainy season, their road would wash out and they wouldn't be able to get to our clinic. So they had a high rate of maternal and child death during those seasons because women were having to deliver at home and there were birth complications and they couldn't get to a clinic. And they had a big proposal to build a new health clinic. And I had to go and meet with government officials and see if we could get a nurse to staff it and midwives and everything there. And we started that maybe a month or 2 months before I left Zambia. And I was really worried that it would just all fall apart. But because they were so invested, like all we had done was clear the land and make the bricks by the time I left. And now it's a fully functioning clinic. So
Nice.
it came from them and they completed it because it was something that they truly wanted. And it wasn't like, here's all this money. Like I did help them fundraise through people back in the US. But I didn't just say like, yeah, here's all this money. I've got these funders, let's build a clinic. They proposed it to me. And then eventually after they had shown me that they were so committed, I helped them get some of the funding and get the government involved so that they could staff it. And now it's fully built and staffed, and their whole community built that clinic. We got the blueprints and they followed them and they made all the bricks out of the mud. They all did it themselves. And that's what's important. You have to have people's buy-in.
I think one of the things like I think the contributions that you guys made were very, very, very fruitful to the community. But I think it's also important to understand that it's not an easy thing to do. Like there must have been some challenges that you had to go through whilst you were there. It's not an easy thing to, especially if you're living in an environment for what, almost 3 years of your life. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
I think being away from home is really hard when big events happen. So like losing family members and friends that passed away, and I wasn't able to be there at the end of their life. If like my uncle was really sick and I wasn't able to go back and see him before he passed. And that was really hard, just being quite a distance away and not having that ease of travel, especially because I was pretty much working as a volunteer without much funding, much of a living stipend to do that traveling. I think, yeah, for me, just being away from family was hard. And then there's the seclusion as well of living in a place where you're the only English speaker and you stand out, or I stood out. I never really felt unsafe there. There were a few instances, but it wasn't like a constant feeling of unease, which is what everybody expects about like, oh, Africa, it's so scary, because that's what was taught to us in the Western world growing up. What I found was family and community and people who were there to look out for me and protect me. And if anything bad happened, or if I came across any negative situations, like that happens in Australia, that happens in the US, that happens in Korea, that happens everywhere in the world. So it wasn't specific to Zambia or Africa, but otherwise, medical was an issue being so far away. I got malaria, I got meningitis, I tore my wrist, I had to have surgery in South Africa for that. I chopped off my toe one day in the village. And
I remember seeing that picture. I think you and
I sent it to you because you were biking in sandals.
Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah, that's my favorite little PSA of don't bike in open-toed shoes.
Mind you, that actually happened to me. When I was younger, I used to, it's a long life habit. I used to cycle in sandals or flip-flops, and my big toe got caught up in the chain. And lost my toe didn't come off, but the nail was peeled off completely. So that's a very, very vivid thing that stays up in my head all the time. So I know, except I still didn't learn from it clearly. So yeah.
Yeah, those were like some of the biggest issues. And then there's always the cultural struggle as well. Getting used to a whole different culture than what you've ever known is just, it takes a lot of adjustment. I remember being really frustrated sometimes, just struggling with the language and not being able to communicate. And I guess I see it now with my clients. Like it's so hard when you can't communicate with somebody and you're just trying all of these things to get your point across. And then all of my village women would just laugh at me. And I remember like sometimes going in my hut and just crying because I was so like embarrassed and I didn't want to keep trying, and they were just making fun of me. And I got past that, but like those times were hard. And sometimes, yeah, just going weeks on end without seeing a familiar face, or sometimes not even speaking English for weeks. That's a really hard thing. So like mentally, it was really challenging to overcome that, and living alone and in a little mud hut in the, like, I want to say in the middle of nowhere, but essentially like there's not much around, and I can't just go into a city and meet other people or catch up with a friend. If like Steve and I met there, but we were 60 kilometers away by bike. And that was about a 4-hour bike ride to see each other. So I wasn't really close to familiar people or a familiar environment. So you just had to kind of create your own happiness and be happy being completely alone and isolated from everybody else.
Geez, that's gonna be tough. So do you think that this experience in the Peace Corps and everything that you're doing now is what's going to take you back in the years to come back to Malawi?
I think so. It's all just building blocks to get to my big goal, which is, yeah, to end up back in Malawi. I would love to live on the lake. I'd love to have a backpackers youth hostel that also doubles as a service center. This dream has morphed since I was 15 years old, and it's always had the same core, but as I continue to grow and learn more and travel around the world and meet different people, it keeps losing aspects and gaining aspects of what I want it to be. But for the last few years, I've been pretty set on it being part backpackers, part service center. I'd love to have a place where if there are kids that are unwanted, or the parents just don't know how to deal with them because of their disability or because of their behaviors or whatever, if they're ousted from the local community, I'd love for them to be able to be there, be dropped off, and have locally trained staff and like mamas that would help to raise them, but through behavior principles and positive behavior support. So I think it's going to take a lot. I'd love to go and do outreach even in Zambia to local areas and really help educate people at the grassroots level again of why these people are born different, and that they do have something to contribute, and what is the best way that they learn, and what are their strengths, what part of the community can they be. Because, you know, I would see like the village crazy person, as they were deemed, and mentally retarded, which is primarily the diagnosis for mentally ill or people that are disabled throughout a lot of parts of Africa. I would hear horror stories about kids if they're born with visible physical deformities, and it's visible at birth, that they would just end their life then and tell people that the baby didn't make it through the childbirth, or people that develop disability or have developmental disabilities and behave differently, being taken out into the bush and either abandoned there or tied up to a tree and food being brought out to them. And this was all information that I gathered from interviewing people around my different areas. I know that I saw a lot of kids that were deaf mutes, and I could see how stigmatized they were and how much they were treated differently by the community. And they would just say, oh, he's dumb, he doesn't know anything, he can't do anything, don't talk to him. And I'd always be like trying to teach him sign language or like some way to communicate. So I think that there's a lot of work to do around destigmatizing that, and the social acceptability, and just showing people that they are humans and they can contribute and they can be part of the community, and just changing that outlook. So yeah, big dreams. I think that I want to do most of that pro bono or through grant funding. So I would also have the hostel just as an income stream. And I think it'd be really cool to have a bunch of different people coming through, visitors from all over the world. And so many people want to volunteer with kids while they travel and teach in schools while they travel. And how great if you're staying at a hostel and you could essentially get free board and free room while you stay if you come to my center during the day and learn how to work with these kids with ABA, with behavior analysis. So that's my big vision.
I like that. I like that a lot. I really do. And I think there's so many places that actually need that. Because like I said before, in my experience living in Central Africa, there's a lot that goes unspoken. And, you know, I grew up with kids that got written off because their behavior and, you know, whatever deformity they might have had from childhood, it was deemed that they were not going to go anywhere. So they just got written off completely. So, you know, it happens a lot in so many places, especially places that are very remote, places that aren't necessarily very touristic and stuff like that. Not the capital cities, but smaller villages, small towns. So much goes, just get brushed. People get left behind.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that really kind of hurts, because especially now that I've traveled and now I know a little bit about it, not obviously a lot, but a little bit, kind of makes me realize just how everyone has a role to play in whatever community and society they live in, and that everyone can contribute. And I think being able to teach that to people, to be able to show that, you know, person X isn't useless in your community, it's somebody that can give value, can provide value. I think it's so needed.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So needed. I definitely, I don't know, as you were talking, especially because we've stayed in some hostels before, as you were talking, I could just visualize it. I don't know if you're the kind of person who has extreme tunnel vision. I'm beginning to see myself as someone who has like this level of, if I see something in my head, I will probably stop at nothing and I will just keep digging at it until I get there, you know? So I think you can do it. I really do think you can do it.
Yeah, I think we can too. It's just a matter of time and gaining all of the skills that I need, and then finally just saying, okay, I don't know everything yet, but now's the time. This is it. Let's take that leap.
There's a lot, especially talking about living and being in a completely different continent. There's a lot of things that you will be able to know whilst you are in Australia, for example. And there is so much more else that you won't be able to figure out until you get on the surface.
Exactly.
And as long as I think you're open to that idea that there is going to be so much learning that you're going to be going through now over the next few years, but once you arrive, it's not going to be like everything I've learned, here I am. It's going to be even more learning to happen once you reach there. There is no reason why you wouldn't succeed, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Have you guys considered going back just for a visit in obviously after COVID and stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially since chatting with you a lot more and about your place, you and Marie's place in the Congo, and what you guys are doing with your land. We've been a lot more active, I guess, in looking at how we can acquire land, or if we want to look at acquiring land before we get there and having it being developed over the years, or having it like you're doing, having it used as farmland and trying to get income off of it. We've talked to some of our friends in Malawi as well about potentially buying land and helping them out during COVID, and it just didn't end up working out. But a lot of people were having to sell their assets and their land just to survive because of what the tourism industry has done already in such a low income area. So yeah, we're a lot more active in looking at how do we get the ball rolling on this. I think going back and visiting is a good starting place to sort of, yeah, just talk to different people and figure it out. The hostel that we love, which sparked a lot of my ideas for this, it's just a really nice, sustainable, eco-friendly hostel on Lake Malawi. I saw just before COVID that the owners who have owned it since forever, that we knew when we were going there, they were looking for new owners. And I was like, that might be our way in, that we start there, get the hospitality experience, figure out how to run the hostel while in the meantime building up this other thing. And yeah, so a lot of different avenues. I do think that getting our feet on the ground is important, just to kind of see which direction we want to take and what's possible, and meeting with lawyers and figuring out how we can acquire land, especially when we don't even live there.
Yeah.
That all needs to come first. It's not like we can just fly on a plane there and be like, okay, we're doing this. Like, it's going to take a lot of prep work. And yeah, there's so much I don't know about, like, even clinically, but, and hospitality wise, but even just about how to establish that. And I'll have to study the language again and become familiar with the culture again, and make sure that, you know, is there even a need in the area that I want to go? What is the rate of kids like this, or that I'm looking to target, that target population? Is it better to start in a bigger city and get a practice established there, where I know that I could have either expat families that I serve, or government, you know, just to get money going, whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know. There's so much that I don't know that I have to figure out.
The only thing I know in my heart, I'm super excited. I'm super excited for your project. I'm even more excited for the idea that if we don't get to see each other, one of the times that we're gonna all get to see each other is gonna be like, hey guys, we are in the Congo, you guys are in Malawi. What are your availability for the next so and so months, and can we get together and stuff? That, I don't know what it is, but that plays in my mind a lot. Like, that makes me so excited to think of meeting people who are doing great work in a different part of the globe, and just keeping that connection going. So we're gonna have more and more conversations about this, because I'm gonna learn so much from you guys.
Oh, and we'll learn from you too.
So
yeah, no, I'm excited for that.
So yeah, I'm excited. I'm super, super, super duper excited for you.
Oh, thank you. Me too. I can't wait. And I love being able to chat with you about it, because it does get me, you know, I spend so much of my life focused on my work, and to sit down and like really hash out what I want to do. Nobody asks me about this stuff. Nobody knows that I work with or interact with here on a daily basis, that I have this massive dream that I'm working towards.
Right.
So it's really nice to focus on that and sit down and think about it and get excited about it again. And the more that we do this, like, the quicker it's just going to come to fruition, because you have to speak these things into existence, and then it'll happen.
I 100% agree. I'm the same, because I'm not always surrounded by the minds of, you know, different people that are, I actually think, if I'm honest, deep down, in some ways, this is one of the reasons why I started this project as well, to be able to speak to people who are doing a variety of projects, so that I can continue this kind of conversation. And I think inside me, it keeps the fire burning.
Good.
You know?
Yes, I like that.
And then learning from other people, hearing about their project, sharing their project ideas and whatnot. And I actually do think that, and this sounds very naive of me, but I genuinely believe that when you share your ideas with other people, you have no idea who is listening to you, who may not necessarily have the energy or the goal to actually get to do that thing that you're doing, but they're willing to help you get there.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know? So I'm so open to the idea of sharing, because I just don't know who might be out there that's actually looking to have or looking to help.
Exactly. No, it's, you can't network and find the people that you need if you don't talk to people about what you want.
100%. And I'm actually learning this now even more. It's becoming more and more clear to me that I need to talk more about the things that I'm trying to do, that I want to do, not in a sense of like I'm trying to brag, but in a sense of like I need to speak it to fruition. And then as I'm speaking to fruition, I'm getting people messaging me. They're like, oh, really cool. I would like to help with this if I can. And I'm like, thanks. Like, thank you for coming into my life in this way, you know? So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I love your doing your visions and yeah, this whole thing. It's so cool. I love what you're doing.
I can't wait.
So honored to be on it.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm so excited. I cannot wait. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you would like to mention before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
Not right now, but if you ever come up with more questions and you want to know more or see
Oh.
where we're at down the line, happy to come back. Or if you just want to learn about human behavior, love disseminating that too.
I'm actually gonna sit. I want to sit and watch and listen and like learn about the work that you do, because I think it's so unique. I don't feel like there are that many people that do the kind of work that you do. So the fact that I'm getting the privilege of actually understanding a part of it blows my mind. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the opportunity, Toby.
No problem. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.